This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. An exciting week of NBA basketball. Wrap it up in the books, man. A lot of things are happening right now with teams fluctuating, the highs and lows. All of it is good, and we want it to stay that way as we venture into really halfway into the first quarter of the season. And you know, in order to discuss the things happening in the association, I got to do it with my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, Dime contributor, writer for one of the illest websites, www.shawsports.net, the big kahuna PNC, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Is it still an Indian summer down there, man?
You got it, brother. Salute to all the fans and listeners of The Baseline. We're having a great time as the season has gone on the way. Lots of great topics to get to, as always. Maybe even introducing a new segment into this week's show. I'm excited, man. We have a lot to touch on, man, so let's jump right in.
Yeah, definitely, man. This week we have our man, Joe Mullinax, who does a great site article, SB Nation's Grizzly Bear Blues. He'll be on to help us discuss the Memphis Grizzlies. What is the state of affairs in the Memphis Grizzlies? Have the Grizz suddenly hit the skids? We'll discuss that with our man. We'll also have a new segment being added on, little nuances that we'd like to introduce to everybody. We are going to do our They Reminisce drop. And so we'll have a discussion and let you know what that's going to be all about. In our segment of the drop, two really big important topics to touch on. This two guys making a reappearance to the NBA's elite. We'll talk about Chris Bosh and Paul George and how their season has started off coming fresh off of some really traumatic injuries. And then we also have the Sacramento Kings. I mean, big talk about this Kings team in the beginning of the season. Which way will they go? Jekyll and Hyde turns. Interesting stuff, and we can't wait to discuss that in our segment of drop. And of course, I covered it coast to coast, discussing all the news happening in the association. So great stuff all around. You know how we do, and we appreciate everyone continuing to show love and support for the Baseline. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. We also encourage you to get at the show's Twitter handle at NBA_the Baseline, hashtag up the Baseline. Let us know who you are and what you're about. Available on all the major platforms, available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, and Player FM. So download any one of those platforms and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things NBA. You know how we do, and you know we cannot wait to set it off. It's time now for the breakdown. Time to break it down to the bone gristle. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA Podcast. And this week's segment of the breakdown, we have our special guest, Joe Mullinax, here to help us discuss Memphis Grizzlies basketball. And over the last couple of years, we have seen this team basically embody the blue-collar ethic of what it takes to work for theirs in the NBA, and have ultimately seen themselves as far as the Western Conference Finals. And while there's still like this air of disbelief that this Memphis Grizzlies team is not indicative of being one of the better teams in the Western Conference, this could actually be the season where we might actually see a trickle of doubt given the start. And so, Joe, we really appreciate you hopping on with us this week to kind of talk about this Memphis Grizzlies team that it looks like they have a little bit of chink in the armor coming out the gate. They just recently won their game, but a 5-6 record actually doesn't really shape the ideas of people out there, I'm sure, in the Memphis land about how confident they are at the outset of this season.
Well, first off, thanks for having me back on. Excuse me, guys. This is a great show. I listen to it a good bit, and you guys do a good job covering all the different teams in the league, different aspects, and I can tell you that the attention paid to Memphis is appreciated, not just by myself, but by others. Still a small market team. It's nice to be on shows like this and have an opportunity to talk basketball with guys like you.
Indeed.
When it comes down to it, it depends on what your expectations were of this season. Obviously, people in Memphis, myself included to an extent, you have a lofty hope and goal of seeing this team alongside preseason. The mentions of the San Antonios and Golden States, the Los Angeles Clippers, Houston, who has also started off pretty weak overall compared to what their expectations were. You know, it's a situation where the Grizzlies were supposed to be one of those top 7 or 8 teams in the NBA, and obviously 6 of those top 8 being from the Western Conference, being the minefield that we all believed that it would be. But it hasn't really fleshed out that way. I mean, one of the major ways it has fleshed out is Golden State is that good and then some. Steph Curry is a cyborg sent from another planet to destroy basketball as we know it. San Antonio keeps spursing along. They're 7-2 as we sit here recording this. Oklahoma City is where we thought they would be as a 6-3, top 3-4 team in the West early on. Clippers are the same way, but then there's been some surprises. Like I said, Houston struggling mightily. New Orleans being 1-9 is a massive surprise. I thought they would chase Memphis and give them some pursuit for that 6th seed. That's where I had Memphis kind of winding up in that 5 or 6 seed preseason. Specifically with the Grizzlies, it starts out with a slow start. And it starts out with guys who you need to hit open shots, not hitting open shots. Mike Conley has had a very slow start to the season. I wrote a feature for our site, grizzlybearblues.com, talking about Marc Gasol and Mike Conley and their mighty struggles early in the year. When you have two guys who are supposedly your two best players, who in theory, and not many people would disagree with this at this point, if you make Mike Conley a 4 or 5 year, $24 million per year guy this coming off season, between Marc Gasol and Mike Conley, the Memphis Grizzlies are going to be paying these two dudes $44 million a season on average. And you have to get more out of your two best players in order to have success. It's not just all on Mike, who has probably had some issues coming back from injury. He looks a little bit unsure of himself. He had a much better game this evening against Minnesota. Or Mark. Mark, obviously, maybe not playing basketball this summer for Spain for the first time in a long time. He looks a little bit out of shape. He's starting to round into form a little bit more as the season grinds along. But it's also the supporting players. It's Courtney Lee, who is shooting a career low right now through these 11 games. It's a Matt Barnes, who wasn't brought in to be a sharpshooter, but he was brought in to be a guy that could defend multiple positions and could hit the three somewhat reliably. And he hasn't done that consistently. The bane of Memphis's existence, at least on Twitter, is Jeff Green. He's a guy who I know you guys are familiar with. He is just not beloved in Memphis at all. He actually has become a borderline hated figure, at least from a basketball stance. Nobody thinks he's a jerk. Obviously, he does good work in the community, and he has commercials with a children's hospital in Memphis for heart surgery, and he's hanging out with kids who are having similar surgeries. It's not about Jeff Green the man. It's about Jeff Green the basketball. And again, he had a good game starting tonight for the first time in a while since the first game of the season against the Timberwolves. But right after the game, some people on Twitter were saying, oh, well, maybe they're trying to showcase him for a trade. So even when Jeff Green does well, people are not the biggest fan of his because of his inconsistency, because of his fit, the question of fit. And same thing goes with a Brandon Wright, who has been injured recently. The past few games he's been out. But here's a guy who it was believed would continue to give Memphis, a big jolt of athleticism off the bench. And he's done that when he's been able to. But at the same time, his fit alongside of Zach Randolph is in question. They just executed a trade to bring in Mario Chalmers, which has been a beacon of hope for Memphis so far because of the fact that Chalmers is doing what they needed him to do, defending, again, multiple positions and hitting the three. He's an upgrade over Beno Udrih, who they sent to Miami, essentially in that deal. James Ennis, came from Miami to Memphis, and then you had Jarnell Stokes going to Miami in that deal as well. So there's been some moving and shaking already for the Grizzlies. There's been some underperforming, which has really concerned some folks. But at the same time, it's a team that's a veteran team. It's a team that was eventually going to start getting their feet under them. It looks like they're getting close to that after wins against Portland and Minnesota. And these next couple of games, especially with Oklahoma City on Monday night, they're really going to have a chance to get above that 500 threshold and really kind of stake their claim to one of those 8 spots in the West where most people thought they would be to begin with.
So, in saying, some of those comments there, it leads us to kind of the larger question. Yes, they're off to a slower start than usual, per se. I think, under Jaeger, that first year, they came off to a slow start as well. But I think the question, that I really want to get into with this team is what you did see in the early part of is the game passing Memphis Grizzlies by. Have they reached their ceiling, per se? I think it's not so much the overall record because, they're hovering around 500 at the recording of the show.
Sure.
But some of their losses have been disastrous. And, over, obviously the 50-point loss, to Golden State, and then the 30-point loss to the Cleveland Cavaliers and 20 to Portland and things like that. Where do you stand on that? I mean, is it really just because the losses are so bad and people are like, oh, they're not playing small ball like everybody else and they're out of here? or do some of those losses and by the margins have, kind of point to maybe in a bigger problem that's happening with Memphis?
Well, I think that part of it is so much attention is on the league at the beginning of the season that when a team gets blown out by 50, more eyes are seeing it. If this had happened later on in the season, the dog days, as they're called, around the All-Star break, before the All-Star break, immediately after the All-Star break, before people start paying attention again when the playoffs get underway. And the fact that Steph Curry is a monster, the fact that LeBron James, whatever he does, is going to get media attention. I would say the one game that they lost so far, and I was talking to one of our fellow writers over at grizzlybearblues.com on Twitter before recording this about this very thing. If you look at their schedule so far, which is a brutal stretch, their first 18 games between October and November, they were playing 12 teams from the 2015 NBA playoffs. So this was going to be a rough beginning for them regardless. The only game that they lost that you could argue they shouldn't have was against the Portland Trailblazers in Portland. And that would have them at 6-5 instead of 5-6, which obviously a winning record is better. But my point is they had a hellacious start to their season. It's magnified because who they lost to and how much they lost by. I think that if you watch this team play and if you see the analysis that's out there, whether it's from our site, grizzlybearblues.com, or whether it's from other places on our podcast, UBB Live, there's all sorts of places where you can get information about that. It's just hitting open shots. It really can be that simple for this team because more and more teams are taking from the Golden State model, and it was initially the San Antonio model before that, and Golden State just did it with steroids, of leaving Memphis' shooters wide open. You go double team the post, and you make Memphis prove that they can hit shots. But teams so far this year, they've taken it beyond Tony Allen, who's kind of been the guinea pig for that, kind of the whipping boy in terms of not being able to score the basketball from the perimeter. They've done it to Matt Barnes, who, again, career-wise, not the most steady three-point shooter, but for the Los Angeles Clippers, he was kind of a nice piece there for them, especially as a small ball four, hitting the three. So they've done it to Matt Barnes. They do it to Jeff Green. They've even done it at times to Mike Conley and Courtney Lee. They're not going to allow Marc Gasol in particular and Zach Randolph to a lesser extent to beat them. So they're going to force the pass out of the low post off of the double team, and they're going to make Memphis prove they can hit open shots. So far, they haven't been able to in those losses. Now, when they've won, they've been able to. I believe the number, and I don't have it directly in front of me, they were 8 for 16 at one point tonight, 50% from three. They hit 8 threes. They were shooting 55.2% at one point from the field. This is a team that has been offensively struggling, mostly because of spacing issues and just not hitting open shots. But if they're able to find ways to get that spacing, if they're able to find ways to make it so that Mike Conley has opportunity off the ball, which is why the Mario Chalmers acquisition is so important in my opinion, it gives Conley a chance to run off of screens, run the baseline, get some open looks in ways that he wouldn't be able to as the ball-dominant guard on the floor. It really is a situation where it can be that simple for these Grizzlies. And history would say, as you just pointed out, maybe it has passed them by. Maybe it is the fact that they just don't have the skill set to hit these shots consistently. But at the same time, I think that that's a little bit premature. As I said, they've just played their 11th game. There's 82 on the schedule, so that means they've got about 71 left. There's lots of basketball to be played, and they had a hellacious start to their schedule. If they find a way to keep it around 10-8 was my prediction at the very beginning of the season for this stretch. If they can go 10-8, 9-9, even 8-10 at this point, and just hang around that 500 number, the schedule lightens up considerably in December and January, and that's where they can start stringing together some wins.
Senior writer for SB Nation's Grizzly Bear Blues, Joe Mullinax, joining us here on the Baseline, our segment of the breakdown, as we talk about the Memphis Grizzlies. Has the Memphis Grizz suddenly hit the skids? And I think it's a very concerning question, but not to the level of degree that I think most people are probably perceiving. But I still think it raises an interesting, introspect to kind of look at what's happened to this Grizzlies team. And it's interesting, Joe, that you mentioned, how the struggles continue for the Memphis Grizzlies, because as of this, as of leading into this game, they're amongst the last in the NBA, the Memphis Grizzlies, in true shooting percentage. And I don't think it's so much as that we're looking at these same guys that we're hoping to kind of come out of the doldrums and kind of shoot their way, into making this Memphis Grizzlies team a team of what I think everyone still keeps trying to make them out to be, as much as it is. This is who they are, and it's just a matter of them finding their groove and doing what they did last year, was essentially ascend them as being one of the top teams in the conversation of the Western Conference. So, my question to you is this: of all of this that we've just basically kind of broken down with the the deficiencies of some of the players and the expectations that some of the players have not lived up to, of all of the moves that the Memphis Grizzlies do happen to do to probably make this team better, they trade for Mario Chalmers, who we've all questioned what this guy can actually bring to the table, minus a winning attitude and a great name for Super Nintendo fans. What can he do for this Memphis Grizzlies team that you already wasn't getting from Russ Smith, that you weren't hoping to get from a healthier Mike Conley? What is it that Mario Chalmers is going to present for this Memphis Grizzlies team to help them get through this hellacious schedule that you just mentioned?
Well, Russ Smith is a guy who has a lot of flashes of potential. Memphis Grizzlies fans love him. But the bottom line is Dave Yeager doesn't trust him, especially when it comes to turnovers, protecting the ball, and possessions, which are so valuable to a team that has offensive struggles like Memphis. And he also doesn't trust him defensively. So Russ Smith is still a project. I don't think they're giving up on Russ Smith. I just don't think they want to play him unless they absolutely have to throughout this season. What Mario Chalmers does is he's an instant upgrade over Beno Udrih. And he does it in a variety of ways. He's shown the capability of converting the three-point shot. Beno was not that guy. He can hit a three, of course. Their career percentages are about the same. But Mario shoots almost double the amount of threes that Beno does per game. And that's a big deal because it allows for that spacing problem. What Udrih would do after he would get the ball is he'd take a couple dribbles. He'd come into the mid-range. He was very effective shooting the mid-range leaner. But that's not the same as hitting the three. The old threes are greater than twos argument that so many in the analytics community in basketball and outside of that, that's the point. Threes are greater than twos. So Mario can do that for these Grizzlies. And the major thing for me is twofold. Chalmers can defend multiple positions on the perimeter. Memphis has shown the beginnings of being willing to switch defensively more than we've seen in recent years from Dave Yeager and his schemes. He's always been very much a heavy, strong side, overload the strength of the offense, and make them kick it weak side kind of guy. But as teams, and this is something that Golden State, Cleveland, they can make you pay for with shooters on the weekend, now he's starting to show some switches because he's got guys like Matt Barnes and Tony Allen who are capable of doing it. Same thing with a Jeff Green and a JaMychal Green, who's been a revelation so far for the Grizzlies. He has fans bringing up memories of Darrell Arthur before he got injured in the 2010-2011 playoffs. Mario Chalmers allows you to be able to continue to do that defensively. He's an instant upgrade over Beno when it comes to defense. It's not even close. He's a guy who has the athleticism, has the foot quickness, has the understanding that he can keep in front of his man, and you don't have to worry about him being a defensive liability. He also, as I was speaking to earlier, allows for arguably your best offensive perimeter player, Mike Conley, to play off the ball more. You can go to a more two-point guard lineup, which Dave Yeager has flirted with in the past, whether it be with Nick Calathes last season alongside Conley, whether it be Beno or Calathes together, or Beno alongside Mike. But this is a chance for them to do it, and it's Mario who, A, is a larger three-point threat, and B, can defend that other guard position. You couldn't trust Beno to do that. You just couldn't. Now you have Mario who can, and that makes it so that you can run that look a longer amount of time. You can get Mike in situations where he's running off of those off-ball screens, where he's getting into positions in and around the baseline and in the corner three. He is going to have crisper, cleaner looks than he would have had if he were playing in another two-point guard lineup against Beno or with Russ Smith. So that is the major difference to me, is he's a steadying presence on that second unit. You can already see that he, even with a limited understanding of the schemes that Memphis runs, he's willing to put forth the effort. He's willing to show that Miami did him wrong in his eyes, and he should have been there. He has a chip on his shoulder, and he's playing with that grit and grind mentality early on of that effort and that intensity that second unit is going to need in order to make sure that if the starters are having an off night or if Mario needs to play more extended minutes with the starters, he can come in and they won't miss a beat. And in some cases, he'll create even more opportunity and openings for the main Grizzlies, Mark, Mike, and Zach Randolph.
I like the addition of Mario Chalmers, for this roster. I'm not traditionally a Chalmers fan, living in the South Florida area and being a Celtics fan, but, it is what it is. I like what you said about, JaMychal Green as well. I think, going green, if you will, with Jeff and JaMychal has proven to be pretty decent for the Memphis Grizzlies so far this season. But my question to you, before we wrap up the segment is basically with the addition of Chalmers and giving JaMychal Green some time and things like that, do you see any other types of moves happening for the Grizzlies? And basically, are you worried? I mean, do you think they need to make some other type of moves? Obviously, shooting is something that is a major issue for them. But do they need to make something else big happen to be really competitive this season, not just to be, get in the first round, maybe make it to the second round and not actually have a chance at the championship this year?
Well, it comes down to opportunity cost. You have to figure out, is it worth giving up potentially a Jeff Green and a Courtney Lee even, who has underperformed? If you put those two contracts together, you're dealing with $14 or $15 million. Does that work out in a way for you to go get maybe a Nick Young and a Brandon Bass from the Lakers eventually? Yeah, perhaps, but those are guys that have multiple years on contracts. You lose some of that cap flexibility. Is it worth it to move on from a Jeff Green, who, when utilized properly, is not a sixth man at this point on a good basketball team at least? He's probably your seventh, eighth, ninth man, and he's a guy who can play both forward positions. He can flash and transition offense. He can hit corner threes. But if that's not how he's going to be utilized, then maybe it is time for him to be moved for something that can help. There's members of Grizz Nation who would argue that Jeff Green is entering Rudy Gay territory, or just moving him on and replacing him with somebody currently on the roster would be an upgrade from Jeff Green. So you could trade him for a ham sandwich, theoretically, and it would be a better spot. The Jeff Green crowd has gotten really, really rough. I'm one of the lone people left on the Jeff Green ship. If there is a move, it'll probably be centered around him. Vince Carter hasn't played yet this season. I don't see them moving him because of his contract flexibility next year. It's partially guaranteed, so they can waive him, and it won't cost them very much to do that. If there's any other move that's coming, it's going to be built around Jeff Green. Maybe they tag on a Courtney Lee. The emergence of JaMychal Green maybe makes it to where Brandon Wright, even though they just signed him, and this is purely speculation, I haven't heard anything about Wright. The one name that continues to get brought up is Jeff Green. And if his contract still holds value in the modern climate of the NBA with the salary cap expanding the way that it is, does that expiring deal have any value to somebody like a Charlotte, who maybe is underperforming? They're kicking the tar out of the Portland Trailblazers as we record this, but they've underperformed so far this season. Does Jeff Green's expiring have value to the Kings or to the Pelicans, who are struggling? I don't know if it does or not, if they're trying to get off of money. And it also comes down to whether or not Memphis wants to lose that flexibility. They haven't been a free agent destination in the past, but if you have Mike Conley and Marc Gasol locked down, those are two guys that are going to keep Memphis, in theory, competitive in the Western Conference for the next 4 or 5 seasons. Memphis might become a more attractive spot to somebody like perhaps a Harrison Barnes or somebody that would be interested in a close to max deal. And then if you bring Harrison in here, you're looking at 2016, 2017, and you've got a roster all of a sudden that's Mike Conley. Maybe they re-sign Courtney Lee for cheap, or even if they keep Tony Allen, you keep Tony, then you bring in a Harrison Barnes or somebody of his ilk, and this roster all of a sudden, and then Tony and Zach are going to be free agents after that, they have an opportunity to reload here. It's interesting to see how they approach that, and if they want to give up future flexibility for a team that maybe Jeff Green for XYZ player, all that gets you is maybe from the 5 seed to the 4 seed and maybe an extra game in the second round of the playoffs. It's fascinating to see how the Grizzlies front office views themselves. Grizzlies fans hope they're an elite team. They hope they can compete for an NBA championship. I'm not so sure of that, but I'm also okay with that. They've had a remarkable run of success, and if they make the playoffs, they win a playoff series, and they're looking at Golden State or San Antonio in the second round, you roll the ball out and you see what happens, but it's still a successful season, and it's still a tremendous run for this core group of guys who have been together for so long. It's so rare in the NBA nowadays to see a core 4 group like a Tony Allen, Mike Conley, Zach Randolph, Marc Gasol stay together, have such a great long run of success. At some point, you have to weigh, like I said, opportunity cost. Is it worth blowing the thing up for not quite the value? You know, you could say go trade Zach Randolph and see what you can get, but a Zach Randolph or a Tony Allen, their trade value is so much greater, or their value as a whole is so much greater to the city of Memphis than it would be anywhere else, that any trade for either of those players would not be seen as a victory for the Grizzlies.
He is the man, senior writer for SB Nation's Grizzly Bear Blues. He also hosts Grizzly Bear Blues live on Blog Talk Radio. And be sure to check him out, www.grizzlybearblues.com. Our boy, Joe Mullinax, breaking it down and giving the Memphis Grizzlies fans a little bit of grace to kind of partake in the future of what will still be a great season, I still think, for this Memphis Grizzlies team. And, look, in my opinion, this Memphis Grizzlies team, about as successful as any other franchise over the last 5 to 7 years in the conversations of the Dallas Mavericks, the San Antonio Spurs. I mean, you can make that argument that minus not getting a championship or coming out of the Western Conference Finals, they have done an awesome job making them one of the more competitive teams in one of the toughest divisions there is. Joe, we really appreciate you hopping on and giving us a little bit of the blues with a smile on our face.
That's a great way to put it. I think Memphis will settle into that 4 or 5 seed in the West. And I think at this point with this crew, as much as they're loved in Memphis, you roll out the balls and you see the basketballs and you see how it all plays out. Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Happy to come on anytime.
Awesome stuff. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, the NBA Baseline Podcast. And this segment of The Drop is brought to you by Rabble.tv. The crew from the Baseline Podcast will be hosting some of our segments on Rabble.tv. So be sure to go to that website, Rabble.tv, revolutionizing the way that we call the games. It's now on us. So be sure to go to Rabble.tv, search the Baseline, and you'll catch myself and Mr. Warren Shaw as we give you play-by-play coverage throughout some really great games throughout the NBA season, and also segments that we normally do here on the Baseline Podcast throughout the week with breaking news will also be featured on that channel as well. So be sure to head over to that website and check out Rabble.tv. They are revolutionizing the way that we call the game. All right, Shaw. So this week in The Drop, two really great topics for us to kind of dig our nails into. And the first one I really like because this is your baby. This was your thought process. And we need to start recognizing guys that, at one point we kind of almost thought we were lost or they were lost in the sauce, so to speak. We didn't know where their careers would take turns because of the impacts that they had with each other's respective teams. You talk about a guy like Chris Bosh, who was a premier player for the Toronto Raptors. He comes over to the Miami Heat. He basically plays third fiddle to the trifecta, but he wins 2 NBA championships. And then when the King bolts for Cleveland, he signs a mega deal, and everyone has these expectations for him to be the man in Miami, and suffers a grave injury, one that could have probably been career-threatening. And then the horrific injury to a guy like Paul George, who plays for the Indiana Pacers, is supposed to be their franchise player on the precipice of possibly beating that Miami Heat team to get to an NBA Finals and restore brilliance to the Pacers franchise. He suffers an injury of just enormous proportions. People have seen it, probably didn't even think he would be able to come back to the basketball court. And these guys both come back for their respective teams and have really put their teams on their shoulders and have ascended themselves back to player elite. Shaw, I know it's early to talk about, but what's going on? What are they drinking out there, Chris Bosh and Paul George, that has catapulted them to this elite status that we're talking about?
Well, I think I'm going to start with Bosh, and for him, I think it's just he has a different sense of his life and the game right now after going through that medical condition with the blood clot. As you know, as we've noted here on the Baseline, I had a chance to go to their media day, and I just remember him specifically saying, he just looked at life differently. He doesn't take anything for granted, and not that he ever really did. It's just he just sees things so much clearer now, and he has that passion back for the game, if you will. Maybe even it just has spiked up a little bit, and he's going out there and giving his maximum effort. He's averaging 19 a game right now. It's according to the show, almost 10 rebounds at 9.7. Hasn't averaged 10 rebounds since 2009, 2010. And really just seems to have that leadership quality that the Miami Heat need him to have, especially playing alongside a guy like Hassan Whiteside, who he said he was going to make his kind of personal project, if you will. But his percentages, his 3-point shooting is at a career clip right now at 39% to start the year, shooting 48%, and which has always been very good for him. Effective field goal percentage of 51%. Just seems to be doing everything right. He's in a very good groove for the Miami Heat, playing offense and defense.
Yeah, Chris Bosh, I think, is having a phenomenal season thus far, and even though the Miami Heat have not like the performance of Chris Bosh hasn't reflected of what I think the Miami Heat's record should truly be indicative of. I think you have to take notice of the fact that he is rounding himself out to be the Boshtrosaurus and not one of an extinct dinosaur in the game of basketball, but one that is of that evolution that we talked about, the hybrid stretch 4-5 guy that comes out and really makes you pay, not for his perimeter shooting, but also his presence down in the paint. And he is finally taking advantage of that. And I think that is going to bode well for a Miami Heat team that is looking to find their way after the life of, after the days of LeBron James. And I know it can't just rest on the days of Dwayne Wade. So when you see what Chris Bosh does, just from an overall perspective, that flexibility and that presence alone, he is finally becoming the guy that I think people have quietly been saying we would love to see him be that man. And I think he's embracing it rather than running from it, which I think is going to help this Miami Heat team continue to stay in the conversation of being one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's vital to what they do, and he has been for a very long time. As you mentioned, kind of in the outset, he was one of the guys who just seemed to be. He was on the outside looking in when it came to the big three. Didn't have the relationship that Wade and LeBron had together, but was always doing his part. And to be very, very fair and honest, Spoelstra had said many times he was the key to what they did offensively and defensively, especially on the defensive side of things, where he's able to switch and play 4 and 5 guys out there, having the lateral movement, and then bringing guys out to the perimeter because he did develop that 3-point shot. But defensively this year, as we're recording this show, his defensive rating is 93. That's really, really damn good. And his offensive rating is 118. So it just goes to show you what he's doing on both sides of the basketball floor for the Miami Heat and how important he really is to their roster.
All right, man, let's go ahead and switch and talk about Paul George. And what can we not say about Paul George? Paul George was the person that we kind of put on that mantle to be the future two-way player that we now say the Jimmy Butlers and the Kawhi Leonards. I mean, he is the prototype. And just when he goes through the kind of injury that he goes through, you would think that his game would be limited. It would probably take maybe a couple of years for him to really settle back into being the player that I think the Indiana Pacers have been praying for when they were trying to go on that stretch run of being in the Eastern Conference Finals and hopefully then catapulting themselves past the Miami Heat to play in an NBA Finals. Here he is basically in half of a year's time frame, and let's be realistic about this, half of a year's time frame, he basically has rounded himself into form as to, again, being one of the top two-way players in the NBA. It's such a rapid rate, Shaw. It's just absolutely phenomenal.
He's doing amazing things on the basketball court right now. Career highs across the board, really. 24.3 points, 8.8 rebounds, 4.6 assists, 1.5 steals, which isn't a career high, but that just goes to show you what he's doing, everywhere on the floor. And again, even in that year, two seasons ago, when he was on the MVP, he was probably the MVP of the league for the first half of the season before Indiana kind of had that post All-Star malaise, if you will. His averages right now are higher than that for the entire season currently, and I think he's definitely going to keep it up. He's on a mission to show that he's back. Picking up right where he left off, if you will, and scoring the basketball at an immense clip. 3-point shooting is there as well, assisting the basketball, rebounding the basketball, and all that talk. Remember, we had all this discussion to begin the year about him playing the 4 position and whether or not that was going to work. He's really kind of oscillated between that. He's played the 3 and he's played the 4 a little bit. They haven't stuck him primarily at that position, but it hasn't mattered. He's just gone out there and he's produced, and he's got Indiana Pacers winning basketball games right now after a rough start to begin the year. I love what we're seeing from Paul George right now. And again, it's welcome back, if you will, to the elite status that he once had.
It's interesting, Shaw, because the thing that I look at when I think about Paul George's game is the fact that he brings versatility to a rather stagnant Pacers team. And I don't mean to say that to demean the team, because, we just had our man Joe Mullinax talk about this Memphis Grizzlies team, and you had raised the question about the Grizzlies, is their play somewhat extinct? And I feel like the evolution of Paul George was somewhat the gateway for the Indiana Pacers to really start adopting a little bit more versatility in the way that they're going to play, the way that they match up, because that's ultimately how they were going to have to beat a team like the Miami Heat, who always and often would play small ball. Now you have a guy like Paul George who's rounding himself back to that two-way player that he is, and you can see Vogel is implementing guys like Mahimi, who has that versatility element in them where he can allow for those matchups to play to Paul George's favor. And this is exactly the reason why the Indiana Pacers are still competitive and they hang in around in basketball games, even against the better teams in the Eastern Conference.
Right. He's like I said, he's doing it all, and especially from his playmaking side of things too, because the Pacers traditionally, George Hill is a nice guy, but he's not a traditional point guard. That's why they brought Monta Ellis over there too, to kind of help with the ball distribution duties. And I really think between Ellis and George and Hill, they're really kind of getting it done. But George has been so great at finding guys, like you mentioned, like Mahimi, finding him on the block when he's establishing post position. He's done that. He's swinging the ball out to guys like C.J. Miles when he needs to, and he's also tried to get Monta Ellis involved. One good thing too is George Hill has worked on his 3-point shot, so that's helped too. So that's another outlet there. For assists when he gets bottled up or doubled on the post. He's seen the game really great right now. And if you've watched the Pacers play this year, you'll see that he can catch and shoot with the best of them. He can drive with the best of them. He can post up with the best of them. He's just, like I said, he's doing it all right now. And it's just so great to see after that horrific injury he suffered. And yeah, he came back last year and, was kind of, a skeleton of himself, if you will, but he's back in full effect right now. And the Pacers cannot be happier that he's back doing what he's doing.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Shaw, before we jump into our next topic of the drop. But if we were to say MVP conversation, who do you think has the best opportunity or the best chance to be in the conversation of the MVP, Chris Bosh or Paul George?
It's Paul George. I think because Miami still has so much talent and other guys on that roster that the Heat can kind of rely on outside of Bosh. Paul George doesn't have anybody the talent, a Hall of Famer, if you will, like Dwayne Wade on his side. He doesn't have Goran Dragic isn't playing like an elite point guard right now, but, doesn't have the talent of a Goran Dragic on his side and, the defensive presence of a Hassan Whiteside with him as well. Paul George and Monta Ellis are a nice, 1-2 combination. Add in George Hill and then some of the supplementary peripheral parts like Jordan Hill and Ian Mahinmi and things like that. Paul George would have to have a leg up in any type of MVP conversation when it comes between him and Chris Bosh.
Yeah, the Indiana Pacers have basically have won 6 of their last 7 games, and his plus minus is just absolutely ridiculous within that stretch. Paul George definitely staking a claim of being one of the best in the game, and he is not shying away from being back in that spotlight. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our segment of The Drop, as we just finished talking about Chris Bosh and Paul George, elite players reasserting themselves back in the talks of NBA stardom for the 2015-2016 season. Shaw, the next topic that we have in The Drop, and I think it's a really good one, it's this Jekyll and Hyde effect that's happening out in Sacramento. We talked about the circus that was the Sacramento Kings, and make no bones about it, they have stayed true to form with all of everything that has already happened to this team at the outset of the season. And when you really look at it for what it is, we said, on paper, if this team gets its act together, they could be a formidable threat, not just in the Pacific Division, but really throughout the Western Conference because of the competitive nature that these guys can bring on a night-in, night-out basis. And when you look at what's happened with this Kings team and now the resurgence of Rondo finally deciding to welcome himself back into the NBA conversations among being one of the better guards, you really have to make this argument that when they got their heads on right and they don't have this bipolar-like effect in the way that they carry their business on a night-in, night-out basis, they could be among one of the better teams in the NBA.
Yeah, talent-wise, they really seem to have a lot going on for themselves right now. Rondo, Gay, Cousins, they're really 3 elite-type players, with Cousins obviously being the best of that bunch, if you will. Rondo when healthy and motivated. And as you've seen right now, as recording of the show, three triple doubles in the last 4 games, now averaging 13.1, 9.1, and 7.1 on the year. It just really goes to show you what he's been able to do now. Now, granted, his minutes have been really high because Darren Collison has suffered an injury, and they hope to get him back as soon as possible. But they had a big blowout, man. They were 1-7, And it was reported that Cousins and the team decided to have one of those meetings, and Cousins basically laced George Karl, where Karl actually wanted him to be suspended. The management group, the ownership group was like, nah, they're not going to do that. They wanted him suspended 2 games, and they stood behind their man Boogie Cousins, which goes to show you kind of where the power struggle has landed, if you will. They are definitely on the player side, and George Karl might be wearing out his welcome. Since that time, though, they have won 2 straight games as the recording of the show. They look very, very good right now, and that's without Collison. And Gay's been in and out of the lineup too, and he's had some struggles. But this is a team that I like on paper, but I hate to see the fact that so many media types and all the pundits out there seem to be right thus far.
I've often, where I've been, Shaw, where I often feel like coaches have a profound effect on the way that the game is being played. And I know that it comes down to the players. The players are the ones that really are determining the wins and losses. But again, this is a clear-cut example of when a coach still has an effect on what a team's mindset is going into competition. And this has been one of my biggest pet peeves with George Karl. Let's not make any mistake about it. The George Karls, the Mike D'Antonis, these guys have great NBA minds. NBA historians know so much about the game. Sit down and you will basically have a plethora of knowledge about the game of basketball by the time you finish sipping your latte and having a powwow with them. But when it comes to the way that they communicate and the way that they instill or inspire players to play to the level that is necessary to be of a championship caliber team, this is where coaches like George Karl have fallen short. Mike D'Antoni have fallen short. And this is a clear-cut example. This has nothing to do with DeMarcus Cousins as much as it is about George Karl and his mindset and the way he does things, that he just does not accommodate to guys like a DeMarcus Cousins. And this is now where the power struggle truly begins. And like you said, he's worn out his welcome in Sacramento. I think it's also that he is wearing out his welcome in the NBA community and amongst the coaching community. Because this is another example of the Kings organization reaching back, pulling a guy like George Karl, who I'm not saying doesn't deserve to be a head coach anywhere. I just don't think he was ready to be a head coach again. And this is, again, another example of a struggling franchise that was so desperate to get a guy to come in to do something very special for this organization that clearly still needed restructuring. And he just is not the person to bring about that restructuring that's necessary for such a young and naive and really dumbfounded group like the Sacramento Kings.
Yeah, it's a weird fit, and I think that's putting it mildly. Sacramento is a situation where they want to be and think they are better than they actually are right now. So Karl is kind of the guy when maybe he's a coach that can finally get you to the playoffs per se. And on talent, on paper, yeah, the talent is there per se, but this team needed some maturation. They needed some growth. They needed to be able to gel. And traditionally, George Karl has been able to get the best out of some guys, but he hasn't been the most cozy guy when it comes to building team chemistry. And this is a team and an organization that needed chemistry built kind of from the top, bottom, all the way up to the upper level management. So we'll see if it the recent winning streak of 2 games, as recording the show, how that plays out, and if they can continue to string together some wins and get back at the thick of things, if you will, in the Pacific Division and the Western Conference. But yeah, I'm with you on it. I'm not too sure that he's the right fit, and he was basically 1 game away potentially from getting fired, because I think if we would have lost right after that blow up, he might have been gone. So we'll see how much time he's bought in himself.
Yeah, but look, and again, it's the way things are done. This is the same Kings organization, which, listen, amongst everyone in the media, we all felt that George Karl should not have been the head coach going into this season, given the way that this was paraded around, not just in social media, but just in general, and just on every conceivable sports outlet that was covering what was happening with the Kings in the background. This exactly was the thing that was stepping out in the forefront and was really turning the ugliness of this Kings organization and the dysfunctionality that is happening with this Kings organization on its head. And so ultimately, it's basically saying that they're pacifying the idea that because out of respect to George Karl, we're not going to do something that clearly is going to get pushed to the point where something is going to have to be done. And no matter how you slice it, egg is going to be on all faces. And I think ultimately what it compromises is this team's ability to still be a relevant basketball team without the distractions of a management that clearly does not have a stranglehold on doing what's necessary to make this team successful.
Right. Well, and there's the rub right there. And it's not just George Karl, it's the upper level management too, that they need to be tweaked and figure out exactly what direction this organization needs to be going in. Again, talent wise, I don't think it's the players per se. I think it's just some of the chemistry fit that they need to figure out. But it's really just what does, Vivek want upstairs? What does he really want out of this organization? What does Vlade Divac want? How are they going to mesh all of this together and become a cohesive unit? And it can, because you can't have a power struggle with the management and the coach and the players, where all three sides are kind of pulling in different directions. Especially with your star player in DeMarcus Cousins. They need to fix it up top first. So I agree with you, but it's not all on George Karl. It's on the management as well. If the Sacramento Kings want to turn around and eventually get back to the playoffs.
The Sacramento Kings now on a 2-game winning streak, but clearly have been playing on thin ice, and the coaching tree has been playing on thin ice as well with the superstar players, DeMarcus Cousins and Rajon Rondo. Hopefully things will look a little bit better, and they say winning cures all ills. Well, right now, this is a terminally sick basketball team, which winning may not just be the only remedy for their issues. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
To reminisce over you. Listen.
To begin training camp for the last season, Michael spoke to me about losing a little of the zest for the game and wondering about how long he would play.
After we won our third championship, we talked once again, and I was kind of leaning towards that direction. And he knew that, and my family knew that, and it was just a matter of waiting until this time when basketball was near to see if my heart would change. And I went through all the different stages of getting myself prepared for the next year. And the desire was not there. And it wasn't like everyone had speculated about all the different media pressure and different pressures that I was feeling. I deal with pressure all the time, and I've always said that I would never let you guys run me out the game. So don't think that you've done that. This is my choice, and I've always wanted to make it my choice, and it's a choice that I chose to live with.
The first segment, of course, has to be done with my boy's favorite player in the world. It's only right that it happens this way. But some 20 years ago, an important figure in the game of basketball dropped the bomb of all bombs. Probably the second biggest bomb next to Magic Johnson's addressing the NBA of his retirement due to being sick with the HIV virus. Michael Jordan's retirement. And I'm sure everybody remembers that. October 6th, 1993, probably next to anything in sports history, probably the time of your life that you just said, the world just absolutely stops. Everything in the world just absolutely stops when the greatest player in the game of basketball just says, I'm done. And Shaw, when you think about that time when Michael Jordan says, this is it, I'm calling it quits at the age of 30, given what he has just done for this Chicago Bulls organization, what he's done in his career, at the peak of his game, he's walking away from it. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, it was stunning. At that time, I was a wee little teen at the time in high school. A big Bulls fan at that time, obviously a big Jordan fan more than anything else. And it really, really shook me to the core, if you will, because, here's a guy who had won seven straight scoring championships, who was the finals MVP, 3 titles in a row. And like you said, was only 30 years old, and decided to just walk away and had enough. And it was something that I'll always remember, and just it perplexed me to beyond all levels, because it just feels like he has so much more to give. He was averaging, I think, 33 points a game. That season, 33, 7, and 5 roughly were his averages, with almost 3 steals a game. How do you walk away at that? Those are elite numbers. And he was just like, what the time in my life has come, and he wanted to pursue some other things, and come to find out a couple months later he was going to go play baseball for the Chicago White Sox, or the Birmingham Barons, if you will. It was a crazy, crazy time in the NBA, and it gave the opportunity, and it opens up some debate for something that we'll never really know, because that's when Hakeem and the Rockets, they were able to sneak in there, if you will, I use that word loosely, is get those 2 titles while Jordan kind of worked his way back into the game a couple years later.
But it definitely put the NBA in such a state of flux. I can only imagine what David Stern was doing once he saw that Michael Jordan was ready to step away from the game. And, clearly he just thought it was an April Fool's prank in October. When you think about what Michael Jordan was bringing to the table, he was revolutionizing not just the game of basketball, but also the marketability of the game of basketball. And ultimately, it made us actually have these conversations, Shaw, that how could someone do what he was doing at this particular moment in time and just say, I'm done with it? It really made you look at more of the human aspects of things regarding players, regarding athletes. When certain athletes like Bo Jackson retire from the game, it was because of career-ending injuries, or guys like Brian Bosworth who basically talked their way out of being a part of the great echelon conversations of being in sports. But Michael Jordan, he basically walked away from the game really without anything for us to press our hat to say that he was being forced out of it. It was the first time that we actually looked at it and said, man, could you not walk out on a better note? You won 3 straight NBA championships, but he could have won 5 or 6 if he really wanted to. And so it really left us in a standstill with the perception of how athletes were looking at their lives and the way that it was embedded in the sports that they play.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, because I think if I was a more mature, if it would have happened at even a time of my life, like even say now, I might have been like, oh, well, this is a man who just has other things going on in his life, and he wants to pursue something else. At the time, I just wanted my hero to play basketball, and I was very selfish. I was very upset, and I was even mad, that he'd go to play baseball. Come to find out, like I said, a couple months later, which again, I like baseball, but I was like, bruh, this is what you do. How are you leaving us right now? And I don't know in essence what the Nielsen ratings were, but I would imagine there was a steep drop off. Even though the Bulls themselves were actually still a very good team the following year, Jordan brought so much watchability, even for the reasons that you liked him and for those who hated on him and wanted to see him lose. Once he was gone, it just changed everything. It changed all the dynamics of the league.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Jordan's presence in the game of basketball was just really unprecedented. And even when the greats like Hakeem Olajuwon is left baffled and confused. Not that he's complaining, would have to turn in his 2 NBA titles that he so rightfully have earned. And there's a reason why he is also called the Dream. But I think it would have kind of made us really think about those great matchups that we wish did take place, maybe between the Houston Rockets and at that time a Chicago Bulls team that would have had Michael Jordan on their roster, what that could have been like. It's not even so much the dominance as much as it was the rarity of matchups when these teams would actually get on the basketball court. And so, yes, we were robbed for a few years of the greatness of Michael Jordan, but I think the NBA also was robbed about the potential of where it could have probably had taken itself to 2 years into the future. I mean, it surely was not without great players still on the basketball court, but for those 2 years, we actually were stuck in a standstill, in a time, loop a little bit about where the game would possibly be without the greatest player playing in the game. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was how we reminisce.
When they reminisce over you, my God. Coast to coast.
Time now for us to go coast to coast discussing the news in the association. Are you ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. Down in Orlando, Victor Oladipo wound up with a concussion. Listen, man, star guards, and this is seeming to be becoming an incessant trend now with the NBA players. We thought it was really bad with NFL players, but NBA players now are getting hit with the concussion bug quite often.
That's because we know a little bit more about that type of injury, so I think people are being more cautious with it now. And definitely sad to see Oladipo go down. He was having a great start to the season, so hopefully he can get right back out there. But I'm glad they're taking their time and making sure that he's right before he comes back.
All right, out in Portland, really bad injury to our man Myers Leonard, out 4 to 6 weeks with a shoulder injury. And look, man, we were talking a lot about how Myers Leonard was really coming into his own, getting the opportunity and really taking advantage of the time needed to help this Portland team be competitive.
Yeah, terrible injury. It looked a lot like the Kevin Love injury from the playoffs with Kelly Olynyk. Not the exact same thing, but it looked like that because his arm kind of got caught in a situation there. But there's some varying reports right now because I'm still getting reports that he's out this game, he's out that game, and like he should be out for a while. So I don't know if we need day-to-day reports on Myers Leonard, but hopefully he's back, as soon as possible because the Portland Trailblazers definitely need him, need his presence, and need him to continue to develop that chemistry with him.
Oh yeah, man, my man's banging out the three-point shot like it's crazy. Out in Indiana, Miles Turner, the phenom. He has now gone 4 weeks with a thumb fracture, and man, look, this kid looked really impressive in his debut playing for the Pacers, man. I can't imagine what Vogel might be thinking about once he does finally get him back on that basketball court, but this kid's got skills.
Absolutely, because the Pacers, like I said, they were making their run, obviously led by Paul George, and Turner was starting to be a little bit a part of that too. That front line of all those guys that they bring out there with Jordan Hill and Yao Mahimi. Turner was a guy who was hitting the jumpers, blocking some shots, doing the things that he does very well, and playing in his lane. Sad to see him be out for that amount of time. Hopefully he can get back right out there too, because the Pacers definitely need him if they're going to make a run for the playoffs.
All right, sad news out in Denver. Wilson Chandler, he is done for the year. Really a bad injury all around. But you know what, Shaw? I mean, if nothing else, this is great for Mike Malone in the sense that I think he's really going to start pushing to see what these younger kids can do, because we pretty much already know what Wilson Chandler brings to the table. I don't think it's going to catapult the Nuggets' chances in what's really been an impressive start to their season.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation there because I think Chandler, as you said, we know who he is. I was surprised they re-signed him to begin with, but definitely you never want to see anybody go down. I think it's a hip injury that he's dealing with, and he's going to be out for the year with that. But it does give, if you look on the bright side, it does give give Malone and his Denver Nuggets an opportunity to evaluate a lot of those young guys out there, Laverne and Jokic, Boudier, all the way down, and they can really see what they have with that team. And then if they even need Wilson Chandler coming back next season.
Yeah, definitely. And then also a couple of important news here. Out in L.A., the Turk, Hedo Turkoglu, he has finally announced his retirement on Friday. Listen, man, this guy, he used to do it all for the Orlando Magic on that great run that they had with Dwight Howard and Jameer Nelson and stuff, going to the NBA Finals. And, clearly he just was not finding any kind of time or opportunity playing for this Clippers team. But he really has had quite an impressive career playing in the NBA. And it's sad that he's basically ending it so abruptly within the season, because this could really be a type of special season that the Clippers may do some things.
Yeah, Turkoglu, I remember him back in the days when he was riding the pine in Sacramento behind Stojakovic, and to see that his progression from those days and to where he became a significant contributor to the Orlando Magic and had some of his best years there. It's really sad to see that his career kind of fell off in the final 2 or 3 seasons. But, he had a great run as a European player. I'll always remember him, and, we wish him the best in whatever his future endeavors turn out to be.
All right, some great milestones to also talk about here on Coast to Coast. Our man, the Mr. Fundamentals, Tim Duncan, he passes a great Celtic in Robert Parrish for 7th on the rebounding list. Shaw, again, just piling up the accolades. What can we say about Mr. Fundamentals, man? Him do it all, man. From St. Croix, him do it all.
There's no doubt about it. And with Duncan, it's like we were talking about Kobe last year and Dirk and people like that. They're at this point right now where every other week they're going to be passing somebody for something. Him not passing, Parrish on the all-time rebounding list. It's just who knows where he's going to end up. But, Tim Duncan, like you said, he's been doing it all for a very, very long time. Salute to him and, all that he's been able to accomplish with the San Antonio Spurs.
And finally, Shaw, our man, KG, the big ticket, eclipsing 50,000 minutes played. What a remarkable accomplishment for really, without argument and unquestionably, one of the ambassadors in the game of basketball, but also just really one of the well-built, structured, enduring players, man. That 50,000 minutes, that's nothing to play with. I mean, only so many players in the game can only hope to do what KG has been able to do just this very past week.
Yeah, man, remember the kid, the big ticket. He came in, as a sprite 18-year-old, if you will. Now he's 30 plus, pushing 40, and been out here for a very long time, now becoming the 5th guy in NBA history to eclipse the 50,000 mark. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Karl Malone, Jason Kidd, and Elvin Hayes are the only other guys who have done it. Now KG joins that illustrious list. First time, he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer without a doubt. Salute to KG and all that he's been able to do so far, and he's continuing to do, and as he helps that Minnesota team develop some of their younger guys.
Yeah, man. Listen, hopefully he will have part ownership. Hopefully he will have a voice, and the Minnesota Timberwolves will be what I think he had always worked so hard and basically broke his back trying to do, which is sell this organization and this team to a level of greatness, to hang a banner, to hold up at that O'Brien Trophy, to do one of any of those things, to have made this Memphis this whole career that he's basically laid before us as special as anything else. And it's just great to see that he continues to have a finger and a pulse in the game that he plays and he loves. Just great stuff all around. And what a great segment here for Coast to Coast, Shaw. And, just great stuff, man. I mean, my man Joe hitting us up with the Memphis Grizzlies. We talking about elite players again and in the Bostress, and our man Paul George. It's great stuff. And of course, what's an NBA Baseline podcast without talking about Michael Jordan, the MJ?
We got it all, right? You know what I mean? We talked to you and a lot of nicknames in this one too. PG-13, Bostridge, and Air Jordan. I mean, we really got the big fundamental, the big ticket. We got them all in this show, and I think it was an amazing time. Hopefully all the fans, listeners out there enjoyed it as well. Shout out to our guy, Joe Mullinax. Again, that guy knows his Memphis Grizzlies, and he knows his basketball. Always a pleasure to talk hoops with him, especially when it comes to the Grizzlies and what they're going to be able to do this season.
Oh, definitely, man. And once again, man, we appreciate you and yours continually listening to the Baseline NBA podcast as we embark on another exciting season of discussing NBA topics and bringing to you everything that needs to be discussed in the association. Before we sign off, myself, and I'm sure my man, co-host, my partner in PNC, Mr. Warren Shaw, we'd like to basically extend our thoughts and our prayers to the citizens and the people in the country of Paris. In the country of France, in the city of Paris. The events that have occurred over the last few days have obviously been horrific and have shook the foundation of how we as a society continue to fight the atrocities that tend to happen with terrorism and with the backlash that does occur when humans cannot get along. And we can only hope that there is a time for peace. We hope that the things that we discuss in sports, it never to always supersede the more major issues that go on in our everyday lives, but give you a little bit more of something to kind of take your mind off of. And we will continue to do our part to continue to be relevant. But again, we just want to extend our thoughts and our prayers to the citizens out there in Paris. We wish nothing but the best as we move forward. And we as a society need to continue to find ways to come together and to be more peaceful in the means of us bringing better solutions to how we live every day. So for the Baseline, we'd like to thank again our special guest, Joe Mullinax, for jumping on with us, and my man Warren Shaw and I, we appreciate you and yours. Continue to listen to the Baseline, and again, check us out on rabble.tv. We will be doing update reports and also be doing some play calling during the season on rabble.tv, revolutionizing how the game needs to be called. Be sure to check that out and check us out on the Twitter. We do it all day, every day. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys, and we'll catch up with you next time.